Let yourself settle in. Let the weight of the day simply fade away, drifting off like dust motes caught in a beam of late afternoon sunlight. Close your eyes if you wish, or let your gaze soften as we travel back, far back into the deep, quiet corridors of time. We are going to a place where the world was younger. A time before the noise of engines, before the glow of electric lights, before the constant hum of the modern world. We are drifting back 3,000, perhaps 4,000 years to the age of bronze. Imagine for a moment that you are standing on the edge of a vast, open plain. It is late afternoon. The air is warm, heavy, and still. There is a silence here that is profound, a silence that stretches from the earth beneath your feet to the pale, expansive sky above. It is not an empty silence, but a resting one, the kind of silence that falls over a house when the work is done, and the inhabitants have settled into a deep, dreamless sleep. Here in this ancient landscape, the color of the world is gold. The ground is the color of dried wheat. The mud brick walls of the distant farmhouses are the color of baked clay. Even the air seems to hold a golden tint, shimmering slightly in the heat that rises from the soil. This is the echo of a summer that has lasted for centuries. A time of warmth, of predictability, of a sun that has shone kindly upon the first great civilizations of humanity. Walk with me slowly through these fields. Can you feel the dry earth beneath you? It is firm, packed down by generations of sandals, by the hooves of oxen, by the slow turning of wooden wheels. The soil here is ancient. It tells a story not with words, but with texture. It is crumbly and rich, the kind of soil that has given life to empires. To your left and to your right, the fields stretch out towards the horizon. They are resting now. The harvest has passed. What remains are the golden stalks of barley and emmer wheat, bowing slightly in a breeze so gentle it barely brushes your skin. Listen closely. Can you hear it? That soft, dry rustling sound. SHHH, SHHH. It is a hypnotic sound, repetitive and calming. It is the breath of the fields. In this era, life moved at the speed of the seasons. There was no rushing. There was only the slow, circular rhythm of planting and reaping, of rising with the sun and resting when the light faded. The people who lived here, the farmers of the Bronze Age, knew the language of the earth better than we know our own names. They knew the weight of the soil in their hands. They knew the smell of the rain before it fell, and they knew the comfort of this long, enduring summer. In the distance, you can see the silhouette of a village. It is not a grand city of stone monuments, but a humble cluster of homes rising organically from the land. The houses are low and square, built from the very mud on which they stand. They blend into the landscape, almost invisible until the shadows lengthen. Imagine walking towards one of these structures. The walls are thick, designed to keep out the midday heat and hold in the warmth during the cool desert nights. Place your hand against the rough surface of the wall. It is still warm from the sun, radiating a gentle, stored heat. It feels solid, permanent. Inside these homes, the air is cool and dim. There is the faint, sweet scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Sage, thyme, perhaps the earthy smell of stored grain. Dust motes dance in the shafts of light that pierce through small, high windows. Everything is still. A clay pot sits in the corner. A woven mat lies on the floor. These are the artifacts of a quiet life, objects that have waited in the dark for thousands of years, holding the memories of the people who once used them. There is a sense of safety here. A belief that tomorrow will be just like today, that the sun will rise, the river will flow, and the grain will grow tall. This was the promise of the Bronze Age summer, a promise of continuity. But as we stand here, watching the sun begin its slow descent towards the western horizon, there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The light changes from gold to a deep, burnished copper. The shadows stretch out, long and thin, across the stubble of the wheat fields. This is the vanished summer we speak of. It is the twilight of an era. The farmers, finishing their day's labor, might pause to wipe the dust from their brows. They look up at the sky. It is clear, painfully clear. For weeks, perhaps months, there has been not a single cloud to break the vast blue expanse. The heat, usually a friend to the crops, has begun to feel different. It feels heavier. It lingers longer than it should. The evenings do not bring the cool relief of the river breeze as they once did. Instead, the warm air settles over the valley like a heavy blanket. Yet there is no panic, not yet, just a quiet observation. A farmer stands at the edge of his field, his silhouette dark against the orange sky. He picks up a handful of dirt. He lets it slip through his fingers. It is drier than he remembers. It falls like sand, fine and powdery. He looks towards the river, the lifeline of this valley. It flows, yes, but it moves slowly, sluggishly, as if it too is tired. The water level is a little lower against the reeds, but the rhythm of life continues. The cattle low softly in the distance, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through the twilight. The first stars begin to appear, faint pricks of light in the deepening purple of the sky. The world is slowing down. The birds have settled into their nests. The wind has died down completely. We are left standing in the fading glow of a civilization at its peak, unaware that the long summer is coming to an end. This is where our story begins, not with a shout, but with a whisper. Not with a storm, but with the stillness of a sunset that seems to last forever. As the darkness gently wraps around the ancient fields, we find ourselves waiting for the seasons to turn. Waiting to see what happens when the rain forgets to fall. But for now, there is only peace. There is only the warm earth, the quiet sky, and the echoes of a time long gone. Let yourself rest in this moment. Breathe in the ancient air. The night is coming, and with it, the secrets of the river valley. To understand the silence of the Bronze Age, one must first understand the sound of the water. Before the drought, before the dust, there was the river. It was not merely a feature of the landscape, it was the landscape itself. It was the spine of the world, the great fluid artery that pumped life into the desert. Imagine the sound of this river at night. It is a low, continuous hum, a sound so constant that the people who lived beside it ceased to hear it with their ears, and instead felt it in their bones. It was a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through the mud brick walls of their homes, a lullaby that had been singing for thousands of years. The river valley was a green ribbon woven through a tapestry of beige and brown. From high above, looking down as a bird might fly, it appeared as a miracle. On either side lay the crushing weight of the arid lands, the unforgiving stone and sand. But here in the valley, life exploded in a slow-motion riot of green. The water moved with a lazy confidence. It was heavy with silt, rich with the minerals of distant mountains. This was not clear, sparkling water found in mountain brooks. This was thick, opaque, chocolate-colored water, liquid earth. It swirled in gentle eddies near the banks, depositing layer upon layer of fertile mud. This mud was the gold of the ancient world. It was soft, cool to the touch, and smelled of life itself. A deep, musky scent of wet clay and decaying reeds that filled the air every morning. For the farmers of this era, the river was a god, a clock, and a road. They did not measure time by hours or minutes. They measured it by the rise and fall of the water. There was the season of inundation, when the river swelled and swallowed the land, drinking in the dryness. Then came the season of emerging, when the water receded, leaving behind the black, glistening soil, ready for the seed. And finally, the season of harvest, when the river was low and tame. This cycle was the rhythm of their existence. It was predictable, it was safe, it was a promise kept year after year. The river gave and the people received. There was a harmony here, a balance so perfect that it seemed it could never be broken. Let us drift now into the early morning of a typical day in this vanished paradise. The sky to the east begins to lighten, turning a soft, pale violet before bleeding into rose and gold. The air is cool, holding the last breath of the night. A mist hangs over the river, a spectral white fog that clings to the tall papyrus reeds. The village begins to stir, but there are no jarring alarms, no sudden noises. The awakening is organic, like a flower opening its petals. The first sounds are the animals. A rooster calls out, his voice echoing across the flat fields. A goat bleats softly from a pen. The lowing of cattle, deep and mournful, signals that it is time for milking. Doors made of woven reeds or heavy timber creak open. People emerge, wrapping their linen robes tighter against the morning chill. They walk barefoot on the packed earth. Feel the sensation of that cool ground beneath your feet. It is grounding. It connects the body directly to the land. The first task of the day is always water. Women and children walk down to the riverbanks, balancing clay pitchers on their heads or shoulders. The path they take is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. They move with a grace born of repetition. At the water's edge, they pause. They push aside the floating lilies, dipping their vessels into the cool flow. The sound of the water glugging into the jars is rhythmic. Glug, 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 then the lift, the balance, and the slow walk back. Smoke begins to rise from the courtyards. Small fires are kindled using dried dung or straw. The smell of baking bread enters the air, flat, round loaves cooking on hot stones. It is a comforting, nutty aroma that mixes with the scent of the river mist. Families gather, sitting on woven mats, sharing this simple meal. there is little conversation. The day's work is known to everyone. There is no need for planning, for stress, for urgency. The script of their lives was written by the river long ago. As the sun climbs higher, burning off the mist, the men make their way to the fields. The light turns brilliant, illuminating the emerald green of the young crops. Here, we witness the technology of the time, simple, elegant, and quiet. The irrigation canals crisscross the fields like a spiderweb of silver veins. To move the water from the river to the higher ground, the farmers use the shaduf. Picture a long wooden pole, balanced on a crossbeam like a seesaw. On one end, a heavy stone acts as a counterweight. On the other, a bucket hangs from a rope. It is a machine of perfect balance. The farmer pulls down on the rope, lowering the bucket into the canal. The water rushes in. He releases his grip, and the counterweight takes over, lifting the heavy bucket effortlessly. He swings the pole, tips the bucket, and the water cascades into the furrow. Dip, fill, lift, pour, dip, fill, lift, pour. It is a hypnotic motion, a dance between man, wood, stone, and water. The sound of the shaduf is the heartbeat of the fields. The creaking of the wood, the splash of the water, the soft thud of the counterweight. It is a repetitive, meditative work. The farmers do not rush. They find a rhythm and stay within it for hours. Their bodies are lean and strong, their skin bronzed by the sun. They work in silence, or perhaps they hum a low tune, a melody that mimics the flow of the river. The water travels down the small channels, guided by the farmer's hoe. He opens a mud dam here, closes one there, directing the life-giving liquid to the roots of the barley and the wheat. The soil drinks it greedily. You can almost hear the earth sighing in relief as the moisture seeps down, turning the dusty gray soil into a rich, dark black. This was the art of the Bronze Age farmer. They were not fighting nature, they were guiding it. They were the conductors of a great hydraulic orchestra, ensuring that every stalk of grain received its share of the river's bounty. While the farmers tend to the land, the river itself is alive with movement, but it is a slow, drifting movement. The river was the highway of the ancient world, but it had no speed limit, only the speed of the current. Boats made of bundled reeds, shaped like crescents, float downstream. They are light, buoyant, and sit high on the water. Some carry fishermen, casting their nets in wide, graceful arcs. The nets hit the water with a soft shhhh sound, sinking slowly. The fishermen wait. Patience is the primary virtue of this age. Larger boats, built of cedar planks imported from distant lands, carry goods. Imagine a barge loaded with ceramic jars filled with wine, oil, or grain. A single square sail made of linen hangs from the mast, catching the gentle north wind. The boat moves silently. There is no engine roar, no churning propeller. Only the sound of the bow cutting through the water. Ripple, ripple, ripple. People on the banks wave to the sailors. News travels this way, shouted across the water from boat to shore. But even the voices seem soft, swallowed by the vastness of the valley. The river absorbs everything: sound, heat, time. At midday, when the sun is at its zenith, the valley pauses. The heat becomes a physical weight. The birds stop singing. The wind dies down. The farmers retreat to the shade of sycamore or palm trees. They lie down on the cool earth, hats pulled over their eyes. The oxen stand still, chewing their cud, their tails flicking lazily at flies. This is the siesta, the sacred pause. For 2 or 3 hours, the world sleeps. The river continues to flow, shimmering under the blinding white light of the sun, but humanity stops. It is a reminder that in this era, man is not the master of time, the sun is. When the sun commands rest, the world obeys. As the afternoon wears on, the shadows begin to lengthen again. The harsh light softens into the golden hue we saw in the first part of our story. The work resumes, but with a slower tempo. The end is in sight. The harvest is gathered in baskets woven from river reeds. The grain is golden, dry, and clean. It makes a rustling sound as it is poured into sacks. This sound, the friction of thousands of seeds sliding against each other, is the sound of wealth, not gold or silver, but calories, survival, future. As the sun touches the western horizon, turning the river into a ribbon of molten copper, the return begins. The farmers hoist their tools onto their shoulders. The oxen are unhitched from the plows. The boats drift towards the docks. Walking back to the village, the air is filled with the dust kicked up by the herds. It hangs in the air, catching the last rays of light, creating a haze that makes everything look dreamlike and soft. The temperature begins to drop, bringing a welcome relief to the skin. Families reunite. The evening fires are lit again. The smell now is of roasting meat or stewed lentils. Laughter, low and muffled, comes from behind the walls. The village, which had spread out into the fields during the day, contracts back into itself. It becomes a fortress of comfort against the coming night. Night falls quickly in the valley. The sky turns a deep, velvety indigo, pierced by stars so bright they look like holes in the fabric of the universe. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens, a celestial river mirroring the earthly one below. The sounds of the day fade away, replaced by the symphony of the night. Crickets chirp in the fields. Frogs croak from the marshlands, and beneath it all, the river continues its hum. The people sleep. They sleep on mats of woven grass, their heads resting on wooden headrests. They sleep deeply, exhausted by honest labor. They dream of the harvest. They dream of their children. They dream of the river. In their minds, this life will last forever. Why wouldn't it? The river has always flowed. The sun has always risen. The grain has always grown. There is no concept of an end. There is only the cycle, the rhythm, the eternal, comforting beat of the river valley. They do not know that the rhythm is about to skip a beat. They do not know that the clouds are gathering, not rain clouds, but clouds of dust. But tonight there is no fear. Only the dark, the stars, and the gentle, rocking rhythm of a world at peace. Sleep now. Let the sound of the ancient river carry you away. Drift on its current back into the deep, quiet night of the past. The change did not announce itself with a shout. It did not arrive on the back of a storm or a flood. It arrived with a silence. A silence that was slightly different from the peaceful quiet of the river valley we knew before. This was a silence of withholding. In the ancient calendar of the farmers, there was a time for everything. A time to sow, a time to reap, and a time to wait for the rains. The rains were the heartbeat of the sky, just as the river was the heartbeat of the earth. They were expected. They were the guests of honor at the annual feast of life. But this year, the guests did not arrive. It began with a subtle delay. The farmers, standing by their irrigation ditches, would look to the north, towards the distant mountains where the clouds usually gathered. They are late, one might say, shielding his eyes from the sun. They will come tomorrow. So they waited. The village waited. The earth waited. Days turned into weeks. The weeks stretched into a month. Usually in this season, the sky would darken in the afternoons. Great, bruising clouds would roll in, heavy with moisture. Thunder would rumble, a low, comforting growl that promised relief. And then, the smell of rain would hit the dust, releasing that sharp, electric scent of ozone and wet earth. But now looking up, there was only emptiness. The sky was vast, open, and terrifyingly clear. Sometimes, a few wispy clouds would appear, thin, white streaks like scratches on a glass surface. They were cirrus clouds, made of ice crystals high in the atmosphere, too high to bring rain. They merely decorated the emptiness, drifting lazily across the blue, offering no shade, no water, no hope. They were ghosts of clouds, passing through without touching the world below. The waiting became a physical sensation. You could feel it in the air. The atmosphere felt suspended, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting to exhale, but the breath never came. The farmers continued their work, but their movements became slower, more deliberate. There was no point in rushing. The rhythm was broken. As the moisture vanished from the air, the quality of the light began to change. This is why we call it the sky that turned to bronze. It wasn't that the sky literally turned to metal. It was a trick of the atmosphere. Without the humidity to soften the sun's rays, the light became harsh and direct. Dust from the surrounding deserts began to rise, lifted by hot thermals, hanging suspended in the upper air. When the sun shone through this layer of fine dust, it lost its cheerful yellow glow. It became a hard white disk, a piercing eye, and the sky around it took on a metallic sheen. At noon, it looked like polished steel. At sunset, it didn't turn the soft pinks and purples of the past. Instead, it burned with a sickly, bruised orange, fading into a dull, coppery brown. Imagine standing in the fields under this bronze dome. There is no diffusion of light. Shadows are not soft. They are sharp, black cutouts against the ground. The contrast hurts the eyes. The heat is no longer a warm embrace. It is a weight. It presses down on your shoulders. It presses down on the roofs of the mud brick houses. The air shimmers. Look across the valley floor. The horizon is not a straight line anymore. It dances and wavers in the heat haze. Trees in the distance look like they are underwater, their shapes fluid and indistinct. This mirage is constant. It gives the world a dreamlike, hallucinatory quality. The soundscape changed too. The air became dry, stripping away the moisture from everything it touched. The leaves of the trees, usually soft and pliable, became brittle. When the wind blew, a hot, dry wind from the desert, the trees didn't rustle with a soft shhh. They rattled, click, click, scratch. It was the sound of dry parchment rubbing together. The dust began to settle on everything. A fine, powdery layer of beige coated the green leaves of the crops, choking them slowly. It coated the window ledges. It settled in the creases of people's clothes. The world was slowly being painted in a single, monochromatic color, the color of dust. The river, the great eternal provider, began to show signs of hesitation. It did not dry up, that would take years, but it retreated. Every day, the water line inched back a little further from the bank. The mud that had been submerged for decades was now exposed to the brutal sun. At first, it was dark and glistening. But within hours, it dried out. It turned gray and cracked. Deep, geometric fissures opened up in the riverbanks, looking like the skin of an ancient reptile. The reeds that grew along the edge found themselves stranded on dry land. Their roots, reaching for water, found only hard, baked clay. They began to yellow. The vibrant emerald ribbon that wound through the valley was fraying at the edges. The flow of the river slowed down. Without the push of the mountain rains from the north, the current became sluggish. Debris, fallen branches, patches of foam would float in the same spot for hours, caught in lazy eddies. The water lost its opacity. As the silt settled, the water became clearer, but it was a stagnant clarity. The animals sensed it first. The cattle, usually content to graze near the banks, became restless. They would wade deeper into the water to drink, their hooves sinking into the sucking mud. The birds, the herons, and the ibises had to fly further to find the marshes that were slowly evaporating, and the frogs fell silent. The nightly chorus of croaks, which used to be so loud it drowned out conversation, dwindled. One by one, the voices stopped, until the nights were left with only the dry rasp of the crickets, a sound that seemed to amplify the heat rather than relieve it. Inside the villages, the mood was one of quiet confusion. Remember, these were people who had lived in stability for centuries. Their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had never seen a drought of this magnitude. To them, the climate was a constant, like the rising of the sun. So when the sky turned to bronze, they did not panic. They did not know how to panic about something they couldn't understand. Instead, they turned to ritual. In the temples, the priests offered more incense. Sweet-smelling smoke rose in straight, unwavering columns in the still air, trying to reach the gods who seemed to be sleeping. People left small offerings of grain and beer at the local shrines, whispering prayers for the clouds to break. "Let the sky weep," they would say. "Let the tears of the heavens fall." But the heavens remained dry-eyed. Conversations in the marketplace changed. People stopped talking about the harvest or the trade. They talked about the signs. "Did you see the halo around the moon last night?" "Yes, it means rain is coming." But the halo was red. That means wind and dust. They became watchers of the sky. Every person became an amateur meteorologist. A sudden gust of wind would cause everyone to stop working and look up, hope flaring in their chests, only to be extinguished when the wind brought only more dust. The granaries were still full from the previous years. There was no hunger yet. The bellies were full, but the spirits were empty. It is a strange psychological state, eating a full meal while knowing that the source of that food is slowly dying outside. It creates a dissonance, a low-level hum of anxiety that sits in the back of the mind. The children still played in the dusty streets, but their games were less energetic. The heat sapped the energy from the young and the old alike. The siesta that we spoke of in the last chapter became longer. People would retreat indoors earlier, escaping the glare. The village became quieter, not out of peace, but out of avoidance. Perhaps the hardest part of the bronze sky was that it did not release the land even after the sun went down. In the desert, nights are usually cool. The sand releases heat quickly, but with the heavy layer of dust hanging in the atmosphere, the heat was trapped. It was a greenhouse effect on a local scale. When night fell, the air remained thick and warm. The walls of the houses, which had absorbed the solar radiation all day, radiated that heat back into the rooms. The interiors felt like ovens. Sleep became difficult. Imagine lying on a woven mat in the dark. You are sweating, though you are not moving. The air is still. There is no breeze coming through the window. You toss and turn, seeking a cool spot on the floor, but the floor is warm too. Many people moved their sleeping mats to the rooftops. Under the vast, starry sky, it was slightly better. But even there, the air felt used. The stars looked different through the haze, dimmer, further away. The connection between the earth and the heavens felt severed. Lying on those rooftops, staring up at the mute constellations, the farmers must have wondered, have we done something wrong? Have we offended the river? Is this temporary or is this the new world? There were no answers, only the silence, the profound, heavy silence of a drought that was just beginning to stretch its muscles. As we close this chapter, picture a single clay pot left outside by a forgotten wall. It is empty. The sun beats down on it day after day. Slowly, inevitably, a hairline crack appears on its surface. Snap, a tiny sound, barely audible. This is the state of the Bronze Age world. It is still whole, still standing, still functioning, but the heat is applying pressure. The moisture that held it together is evaporating. The first microscopic cracks are appearing in the foundation of civilization. The farmers wake up to another cloudless dawn. They look at the bronze sky. They pick up their tools. They go to the river that is a little further away than it was yesterday. They are resilient. They are strong. But they are walking into a future where strength alone might not be enough. The summer is over. The endless autumn of dust has begun. And we, looking back from the comfort of the present, know that the hardest days are still to come. But for now, let us leave them in the warm, hazy twilight, hoping for a rain that will not fall. Sleep now, let the warmth of the ancient sun relax your muscles. Let the stillness of the bronze sky quiet your mind. Everything is slow, everything is warm, everything is still. If the changing sky was the first sign of the great shift, the wind was its voice. In the lush years, the wind had been a friend. It was a cool messenger from the north, carrying the scent of the sea or the damp freshness of the mountains. It would brush through the valley like a soft hand, cooling the sweat on the farmer's brows. But now, the wind had changed its character. It no longer came from the north. It began to blow from the south and the west, from the deep, endless deserts. It was a dry wind, a thirsty wind. Close your eyes and listen to the sound of it. It is not a howling gale. It is not a storm that rages and then passes. No, this wind is a whisper, a constant, low-frequency sibilance that never truly stops. Hiss, hiss, it moves through the valley with a persistent determination, searching for every drop of moisture it can find. It moves through the drying reeds along the riverbank. In the past, the reeds were green and pliable. They would bend silently. Now they are yellow and brittle. When the wind moves through them, they do not bend, they rattle. It is the sound of dry parchment rubbing together, a scratching, rustling murmur that fills the afternoons. This wind carries a passenger, dust. Not the heavy sand of a storm, but a fine, flour-like powder. It is so light that it stays suspended in the air. When the wind blows, you can hear the tiny particles hitting the walls of the mud brick houses. Tick, 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 millions of microscopic collisions. It is a sound like falling sand in an hourglass, measuring out the time of the drought. The air feels textured. If you were to walk outside in this wind, you would feel it against your skin, warm, abrasive, and incredibly dry. It evaporates the moisture from your skin before you even realize you are sweating. It chaps the lips, it makes the eyes squint. It is a wind that demands to be felt, constantly reminding the people of the valley that the environment is no longer soft. It has become coarse. Under the influence of this drying wind, the river began to change more drastically. The water, once high and mighty, was being stolen away, drop by drop, into the hungry air. Stand on the riverbank now. Look at the mud. A few months ago, the water lapped against the grassy verge. Now, there is a wide strip of exposed earth between the grass and the water. It looks like a scar running along the length of the valley. This exposed mud tells the story of the river's retreat. Near the water, it is still dark and soft. But a few feet up the bank, the wind has done its work. The mud has turned a pale gray. It has cracked into perfect geometric shapes, hexagons and pentagons, like a giant natural mosaic. These cracks are deep. If you drop a pebble into one, it disappears into the darkness. The wind whistles over these cracks, creating a faint, hollow tone, like breath blowing over the lip of a bottle. Woo, woo, a mournful, low flute played by the earth itself. The farmers, coming to the river to fill their jars, have to walk further now. They step carefully over the cracked earth. Their sandals make a crunching sound on the dried crust. Crunch step, crunch step. The wooden piers and docks, which once floated on the water, now sit awkwardly on the mud, tilted at angles. They look like stranded skeletons, bleached white by the relentless sun. The boats have to be pushed further out to find water deep enough to float. The sound of a boat bottom dragging across the sand, scrap, is a harsh interruption in the quiet afternoon. The reflection on the water is different too. The river is narrower, so it reflects less of the sky. It seems smaller, more humble. It flows quietly, trying to conserve its energy, hiding between the steepening banks. The wind ripples the surface, blurring the reflection, turning the water into a textured sheet of hammered metal. As the wind whispered through the fields, it began to steal the color from the world. The Bronze Age was a colorful time: green crops, blue flax flowers, red poppies, dark earth. But the drying wind acted like a bleach. The trees were the first to surrender. The sycamores and acacias, whose roots went deep, sensed the lack of water in the soil. To survive, they began to shed their leaves. It was not autumn, but the ground was littered with brown, curled leaves. The wind would pick them up and dance them across the hard-packed ground. Skitter, 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 the crops, the precious barley and wheat, stopped growing tall. They stunted. The vibrant green turned to a pale, sickly yellow. The tips of the leaves turned brown and curled inward, as if trying to protect themselves. When the farmers walked through the fields, the plants didn't brush softly against their legs. They scratched. Even the clothes of the people seemed to lose their color. The dust settled into the weave of the linen, turning white robes into beige. The vibrant paintings on the temple walls, exposed to the abrasive wind, began to fade. The sharp outlines softened. The bright blues and reds were dusted over with a layer of gray. The world was becoming monochromatic. It was a sepia-toned existence. This lack of visual contrast is hypnotic. When you look at a landscape where everything is a shade of brown or gold, the eyes relax. There is nothing to focus on, nothing to grab your attention. It is a visual lullaby. The animals, too, moved with less color and vigor. Their coats were dusty. The cattle stood with their backs to the wind, heads low, eyes half closed to keep out the grit. They stopped lowing. They conserved their moisture. Silence and stillness were the best defenses against the wind. In the village, the social atmosphere shifted. The wind made it difficult to talk outside. If you opened your mouth to shout a greeting, the dry air would rush in, parching your throat. The wind would snatch the words away, carrying them off into the desert, so people spoke less. And when they did speak, they spoke softly, leaning in close to one another. Imagine a group of farmers sitting in the lee of a wall, sheltered from the breeze. They are repairing their tools. The sound of wood against stone, the rhythmic sharpening of a sickle. SHHK, 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 they talk in low murmurs. The river dropped another hand-width today. The wind is eating the soil. The canal is silting up. There was no panic in their voices, just a factual recounting of the slow disaster. Panic requires energy. Panic requires adrenaline, but the heat and the wind drained them of that energy. They were in a state of endurance. They were observing the changes with a weary acceptance. They began to cover their faces. Men and women wrapped their headcloths across their mouths and noses, leaving only their eyes exposed. This muffled their voices even further. A village of veiled figures, moving slowly through the haze, communicating with nods and hand gestures. Inside the homes, the women hung wet cloths over the windows and doorways. It was an ancient form of air conditioning. The wind would blow through the wet cloth, cooling down as it entered the room. But in this drought, the cloths dried out in minutes. The women spent their days re-wetting them, a constant cycle of dipping and hanging. The sound of water dripping from the cloth onto the stone sill, drip, 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 was a precious sound, a reminder of the wetness that was disappearing from the world. The wind did not just erode the soil, it seemed to erode time itself. Days blurred into one another. Without the distinct weather patterns, without the sudden storm, the cloudy day, the clear day, every day looked exactly the same. Sun up, wind starts, dust rises, sun reaches zenith, heat peaks. Sun sets, wind dies down slightly. This repetition is powerful. It creates a loop. The farmers felt as though they were living the same day over and over again. The dust covered their tracks from yesterday, so every morning the ground looked untouched, as if they had never been there. They watched the sand dunes on the horizon. The dunes were moving. Slowly, imperceptibly, the desert was creeping closer to the farmland. The wind was pushing the grains of sand, rolling them over the crest of the dunes. It was a slow invasion. But even this invasion was quiet. There was no crashing of walls, just the soft accumulation of sand in the corners of the fields. A farmer might wake up to find a thin drift of sand across his doorstep. He would sweep it away. Swish, swish, but the next morning it would be back. It was a battle of attrition. The wind was patient. It had millions of years. The farmers had only their lifetimes. They realized, perhaps for the first time, how small they were, how temporary. The wind had blown before they were born, and it would blow long after they were gone. As evening comes, the character of the wind shifts again. The sun drops below the dusty horizon, leaving a blood-red afterglow. The temperature drops, but not enough. The night wind is not cool, but it is less harsh. It settles down. The dust begins to fall out of the air, clearing the view of the stars slightly. The hissing sound fades into a gentle sigh. The village goes to sleep to the sound of this sighing wind. It moves through the empty streets, rattling a loose shutter here, moving a basket there. It whistles softly through the cracks in the mud walls. Lying in the dark, listening to the wind, it sounds like a lullaby, a dry, ancient lullaby sung by the desert. It tells you to close your eyes. It tells you that there is nothing you can do tonight. The wind will blow, the sand will drift, and the river will flow. You are safe inside. The walls are thick. Let the wind whisper its secrets to the empty fields. You do not need to listen anymore. The sound becomes white noise, a constant, rhythmic background texture that pushes away all other thoughts. The drying wind is tired now. It slows down. It whispers shhhhh, shhhhh, sleep. Let the dust settle. Let the wind carry your dreams away into the vast, silent night. Leave the blinding brightness of the bronze sky behind. Step out of the drying wind. Let us walk together into the cool, dark heart of the Bronze Age village, the granary. In every settlement, from the smallest hamlet to the greatest city, the granary was the most important building. It was not a temple to the gods of the sky, but a temple to the earth. It was a fortress built not to keep enemies out, but to keep life in. Imagine the architecture. The walls here are double the thickness of a normal house. They are built of massive mud bricks, mixed with straw and baked in the sun until they were as hard as stone. These thick walls were designed to insulate, to keep the interior temperature stable and cool, regardless of the scorching heat outside. As you step inside, the first thing you notice is the drop in temperature. It is a relief. The air here is still. It does not move. It is trapped, cool and heavy, preserved in the shadows. But the second thing you notice is the sound, or rather, the lack of it. Years ago, during the times of plenty, this building was a hive of activity. It was loud. There was the constant sound of men shouting orders, the grinding of heavy stone doors opening, the shuffling of feet carrying heavy sacks. There was the sound of grain, tons of it, being poured onto the floor. It sounded like a heavy rain, a constant shhhhh, as golden waterfalls of barley and wheat cascaded into massive piles. Now, however, the granary is silent. It is a profound, cavernous silence. Your footsteps, usually soft on the packed earth, now echo. Tap, tap, tap. The sound travels up to the high wooden rafters and bounces back, emphasizing the emptiness of the space. It feels like entering a library after hours, or a church on a Tuesday afternoon, a space of reverence, waiting for a congregation that has not arrived. Although the granary is nearly empty, the memory of the harvest remains. It lingers in the smell. Breathe in. Can you smell it? It is a faint, sweet, dusty aroma. The smell of dried straw, of ancient husks, of starch that has turned to powder. It is a comforting, earthy scent, the smell of safety. It hangs in the air, a ghost of the abundance that once filled this room to the rafters. Walk slowly down the central aisle. On either side there are partitions made of low brick walls, designed to separate the different crops. Here lies the bay for the emmer wheat. There, the bay for the 6-row barley. Further back, the lentils and the chickpeas. In the past, these bays were overflowing. The grain would be piled so high it would spill over the low walls, creating a golden landscape of rolling hills inside the building. Children would sometimes sneak in to slide down the grain piles, laughing as the seeds got into their tunics. Now the bays are clean, the floor has been swept. In the corners you might see a small, humble mound of grain, not a mountain but a small hill. It sits there, precious and guarded. The dust motes dancing in the shafts of light settle gently onto these small piles, as if trying to cover them with a blanket. The texture of the floor is visible now. You can see the wear patterns in the clay, the smooth depressions where generations of workers stood to measure the dole. The floor itself is a map of labor, revealed now by the absence of the product. It is not a sad sight necessarily. It is a clean sight. There is a minimalist beauty in it. The lines of the architecture are clear. The shadows are long and uninterrupted. The space breathes. It is resting. After years of bearing the weight of tons of grain, the floor is finally unburdened. In the center of the granary, there sits a small wooden table. Behind it sits the keeper of the grain, the scribe. In this era, writing was invented largely for this purpose: to count, to track. To measure, the scribe is an old man, his skin like crinkled parchment. He sits perfectly still, a reed stylus in his hand, a tablet of wet clay before him. He is the accountant of survival. Watch his movements. They are slow and economical. He does not rush. There is no need. The grain is not coming in fast enough to require speed. He dips his stylus. He makes a mark. Wedge, line, wedge. He is calculating the reserves. He looks at the small piles. He looks at the clay jars sealed with wax. He does the mental math of the drought. If we release 10 sacks this week, he thinks, we will have enough for the winter solstice. He works in silence. The only sound is the scratching of the reed on the clay. Scritchy scratch, it is a dry, rhythmic sound, loud in the quiet hall. Sometimes he pauses. He picks up a single grain of barley from the table. He rolls it between his thumb and forefinger. It is hard, dry, and perfect, a tiny capsule of life. He respects it. In times of plenty, a single grain is nothing. It is swept away with the chaff. In times of shortage, a single grain is a universe. He places it gently back onto the pile. He is not afraid. He is a man of logic. He knows that the granary is silent because it is doing its job. It is slowly exhaling the life it stored up during the good years. It is a slow, controlled release. Along the walls of the granary stand the great storage jars. These are massive ceramic vessels, some as tall as a man. They are shaped like teardrops, with wide mouths and tapered bases, resting in wooden stands or buried partially in the earth to keep them upright. Walk over to them. Run your hand along the rough, cool terracotta surface. These jars were made by hand, coil by coil, by the potters of the village. You can still feel the ridges left by their fingers. Tap on one of them, thunk. It is a dull, hollow sound, a sound that resonates deep within the belly of the jar. In the past, these jars were filled with oil, wine, or precious seeds for the next planting. They were sealed tight with mud stoppers and marked with the cylinder seal of the overseer. Now many of them are unsealed. Their mouths are open, dark circles gaping at the ceiling. If you lean over and listen, you can hear the ocean sound inside the empty jar, the way the acoustics trap the ambient noise of the room. It is a low, vibrating hum, the song of emptiness. But not all are empty. Some still have their seals unbroken. They are the reserve of the reserve. They are the insurance policy. They stand like silent sentinels, guarding their contents, waiting for the moment of absolute necessity. There is a tension in their presence, a potential energy waiting to be released. Occasionally, a mouse might have scurried across the floor in the old days, but even the mice have left. They have moved to the fields or the houses. The granary is too clean for them now. The cats, the guardians of the grain, still patrol out of habit. You might see a shadow move in the rafters, a pair of green eyes watching. But the cat moves silently, paws making no sound on the beams, before settling down to sleep. There is nothing to hunt. The predator and the protector both rest. The silence of the granary has spilled out into the village life, affecting how people eat and celebrate. The great festivals, where beer flowed like the river and bread was baked in loaves the size of wheels, have ceased. The brewery, usually located next to the granary, is quiet. The smell of fermenting mash, that sour, yeasty, bubbling smell, is gone. The large vats are dry. Instead, the distribution of food has become a solemn, almost religious ritual. Every morning, the heads of the households come to the granary. They form a line. There is no pushing, no shouting. The drought has humbled everyone. They stand in the cool shadow of the entrance, holding their bowls and baskets. The scribe nods. An assistant measures out the ration. Scoop, pour, scoop, pour. The sound of the grain hitting the basket is quick and sharp. It is not a heavy flow anymore. It is a precise allowance. The people accept it with a bow. They cover the grain with a cloth, protecting it from the wind and the eyes of others. They walk back to their homes quietly. The cooking fires are smaller now. The meals are slower. People chew their food longer, savoring the texture, extracting every bit of flavor from the bread and the porridge. The conversation at dinner is soft. The shortage has brought families closer. They sit knee to knee around the bowl. They share. If a child is still hungry, a parent silently slides their portion over. It is done without words. The silence of the granary has taught them the value of the silence of sacrifice. There is a dignity in this scarcity. It is not a chaotic starvation. It is a managed decline. It is the human ability to adapt, to shrink one's needs to fit the reality of the world. It is a quiet kind of heroism. As the day ends and the sun sinks below the horizon, the granary becomes even darker. The shafts of light fade. The shadows swallow the empty corners, then the jars, and finally the scribe's table. The scribe stands up. He stretches his back. He packs away his stylus and his seal. He walks to the great wooden doors. The hinges creak, a long, slow groan of wood against wood as he pushes them shut. Creak, thud. The sound of the heavy wooden bar sliding into place signifies the end of the day. Clunk. Inside, in the pitch black, the granary is alone. It holds its breath. It is a vacuum of silence. The air is cool, undisturbed. The dust settles completely. The empty jars stand in the dark, waiting. The small piles of grain wait. The building is sleeping. It is dreaming of the days of gold, and perhaps dreaming of the day when the rains will return and the floor will groan once again under the weight of the harvest. But for now, there is only the dark. There is only the cool. There is only the silence. Let yourself drift into that silence. Imagine you are floating in that cool, dark air, safe within the thick walls. The world outside, the heat, the wind, the worry cannot touch you here. You are in the sanctuary of the stone and earth. Rest in the quiet of the silent granaries. When the river retreats and the sky turns to bronze, the mind of the farmer must change. For centuries, the people of the valley had worshipped the wheat and the barley. These were the noble crops, the kings of the field. They were tall, elegant, and golden, but they were also thirsty. They were demanding. They required the river to kiss their roots constantly. Now, in the silence of the drought, the farmers began to look down, not at the grand fields, but at the edges, at the forgotten corners. They noticed something interesting. While the noble wheat withered and bowed its head in the heat, there were other plants, humble, ignored weeds and grasses that stood tall. They were green. They were alive. How? The farmers asked the silent question, how do you survive when the king dies? The answer lay in the nature of resilience. These plants did not try to be grand. They were tough. They had leaves that were narrow and waxy, holding onto every drop of moisture. They had roots that did not spread out near the surface, but dove deep, drilling down into the cool darkness of the subsoil to find the water that the sun could not reach. This was the first lesson of resilience. To survive the bronze sky, one must become like the weed. One must be smaller, tougher, and deeper. The elders of the village, men and women whose skin was as cracked as the mud, began to talk. They remembered stories from the traders. Traders who came from the harsh lands, from the steppes and the deep deserts where the river never flowed. Those people did not eat wheat. They ate something else, something smaller. And so the search for the seeds of resilience began. It was not a frantic search, but a slow, methodical turning of attention, a quiet revolution of the soil. Imagine a farmer sitting in the shade of a dying acacia tree. In his hand, he holds a small leather pouch, traded from a nomad for a piece of cloth. He opens it. Inside, there are no golden kernels of barley. Instead, there are thousands of tiny, round beads. They are pale yellow, almost white, like miniature pearls. This is millet. The farmer pours them from one hand to the other. Shhhh, shhhh, the sound is different. It is fluid, almost like water itself. These seeds are hard. If you bite one, it could crack a tooth. They are armored. He looks at them with curiosity and skepticism. Can this tiny, hard bead replace the soft, sweet bread of his ancestors? He decides to try, but he does not plant a whole field. He is cautious. He chooses a small plot of land, a patch of dry earth near the edge of the village. He breaks the ground with his hoe. The soil is dusty and gray. It looks dead. He scatters the millet seeds. He covers them with a thin layer of dust, and then he gives them a little water, just a little, for that is all he has. Then the waiting begins again. But this is a different kind of waiting. It is an active waiting. It is an experiment. Every morning, before the sun becomes a hammer, he visits the plot. He squats down, his knees popping softly, and stares at the ground. Days pass. And then a miracle. A tiny spike of green punches through the crust. It is not the broad, soft leaf of the wheat. It is a sharp, jagged blade. It looks aggressive. It looks like a warrior. The millet grows. It does not ask for more water. It drinks the dew. It drinks the humidity in the air. It grows slowly, conserving its energy. It is a plant that understands the drought. It was born for this. The farmer touches the leaf. It is rough. It feels like a cat's tongue. This roughness is its shield against the wind. As the millet patch establishes itself, the farmers begin to understand the architecture of survival. They dig up one of the plants to study it. They gently brush away the soil to reveal the root system. They are astonished. The plant above the ground is small, maybe only knee-high, but the roots. The roots are a massive, tangled web that goes down deeper than the height of the plant itself. It is an iceberg strategy. The real strength is hidden. This realization changes their philosophy. In the good years, they focused on what was visible, the height of the stalk, the size of the head. In the bad years, they learned to focus on what was invisible, the depth of the root. They began to seek out other crops that shared this wisdom. They found chickpeas, garbanzo beans. These small, wrinkled seeds were ugly compared to the smooth barley, but they were survivors. They found lentils, flat and unassuming, that could grow in the poorest, rockiest soil. The color of the fields began to change. The monochromatic gold of the wheat was replaced by a patchwork of textures. The feathery tops of the millet, the low bushes of the chickpeas, the creeping vines of the lentils. It was a less majestic landscape, perhaps. It didn't ripple in the wind like a golden ocean. It was a scrubby, patchy landscape, but it was green. And in a world of bronze and beige, green is the most beautiful color of all. The farmers learned to space the plants further apart. In the wet years, seeds were sown thickly, competing for the sun. Now they were sown thinly. Each plant was given its own territory, its own circle of moisture. Give them room to breathe, the farmers would whisper. Give them room to drink. This spacing created a new visual pattern in the fields, dots of green on a canvas of brown, a pointillist painting of survival. It was orderly, it was logical, it was calm. Finally, the time came to harvest the resilience. Harvesting millet is not like harvesting wheat. You do not scythe down the whole field in one sweeping motion. You must be more personal. You walk through the rows and cut the seed heads one by one. The farmers gathered the millet heads. They were heavy, dense with seeds. They carried them to the thrashing floor. Thrashing millet is a gentle sound. The seeds pop out of their husks easily. The pile of tiny pearls grew. The scribe, who we met in the silent granary, came to record this new wealth. He had to invent a new symbol on his clay tablet for millet, a small circle with a dot in the center. Then came the true test, the kitchen. The women ground the millet into flour. It was harder work. The stones ground together, grind, 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 a lower, deeper sound than the wheat grinding. The flour was coarser. It was not white, it was grayish-yellow. They mixed it with water. It did not rise like wheat bread. It stayed flat. They baked it on the hot stones. The family gathered around for the evening meal. The mood was tentative. The father broke a piece of the millet flatbread. It snapped with a crisp sound. He chewed it. It was different. It had a nutty flavor. It was dense. It required more chewing. It was not the sweet, airy bread of the past. It was the bread of reality. He swallowed. It filled his belly. It gave him strength. He looked at his family and nodded, a slow, silent nod. "It is good," the nod said. "We will live." They did not feast. One does not feast on millet. One sustains on it. But there was a profound satisfaction in that meal. They had outsmarted the sky. The sun had tried to burn them out. The river had tried to starve them, but they had found a way around it. They had found the loophole in nature's contract. As the sun sets over the new, strange-looking fields, there is a sense of quiet pride in the valley. The panic has receded. The waiting is over. They are no longer victims of the climate. They are students of it. The wind still blows, carrying the dust. The heat still presses down, but the millet stands firm. It does not bow. It stands rigid, holding its precious seeds tight, guarding the future. The farmers sleep better tonight. The granaries are still mostly empty, but the jar in the corner of the kitchen is full of little yellow pearls. This is the turning point. They have secured the food. But food needs water to cook, and the crops need water to grow. The river is still retreating. The next challenge is not what to plant, but how to catch the elusive ghost of water. But for now, let us rest with the seeds, small, hard, and infinite, holding the code of life in a shell of stone. They are sleeping in the earth, and they are sleeping in the jars. Sleep with them. Feel the safety of the hard shell. Feel the patience of the deep root. You are resilient. You can adapt. You are safe. Water flows. That is its nature. It seeks the lowest point, rushing away from the high ground, hurrying towards the sea. In the times of plenty, the farmers let the water go, knowing more would always come. But in the time of the bronze sky, they learned a new truth. Water is a guest that must be persuaded to stay. This realization gave birth to a new art form. It was not the art of pottery or weaving, but the art of the earth itself. They stopped looking at the sky, begging for rain to fall. Instead, they looked at the ground, preparing a trap for the rain should it ever decide to return. The philosophy was simple. If a drop of rain falls, it must not be allowed to move. It must be caught, it must be held, it must be forced to sink down inch by inch into the soil. and so the great reshaping began. Imagine the sound of this work. It is not the clang of metal on metal. It is the dull, heavy thud of wood on earth. Thump, 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 the farmers took their hoes, simple tools made of hard acacia wood or flint, and began to carve the hillsides. They looked at the gentle slopes where the water used to run off quickly. They saw this runoff now as a theft. The hill was stealing the water, so they began to cut into the slope. They dug into the high side and filled in the low side. Slowly, painfully, they turned the slanted ground into a series of flat steps. This is what we call terracing. Visualize a giant staircase carved into the valley wall. Each step is perfectly flat. The edge of each step is reinforced with stones gathered from the fields. The labor is repetitive. A farmer picks up a stone. It is warm from the sun. He feels its weight, its rough texture. He finds the perfect spot for it in the wall. Clink. It settles into place. He picks up another. Clink. There is a meditative quality to this stacking of stones. It requires patience. If you rush, the wall falls. If you are steady, the wall stands for 1,000 years. These stone walls are the guardians of the soil. They stand in long, horizontal lines, stretching across the landscape like the lines on a sheet of music paper. Down on the flat valley floor, a different pattern was emerging. The farmers knew that even on flat ground, water could spread out too thin and evaporate before the plants could drink it. So they created the waffle gardens. Imagine looking down at the earth from above. The fields are no longer vast, open plains. They have been divided into a grid. Thousands of small squares, each one no bigger than a dining table. To make these squares, the farmers built low walls of mud, called bunds, around each plot. These walls are only a few inches high, but they are crucial. Watch the hands of the builder. He scoops up a handful of wet clay, precious mud from the riverbank mixed with straw. He shapes it into a ridge. He pats it down. Pat, 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 he smooths the sides. It looks like a honeycomb made of earth. The logic is beautiful. When the water comes, whether from a bucket or a cloud, it is poured into one of these squares. The walls keep it there. The water cannot run away. It pools in the square, covering the roots of the millet or the chickpeas. It sits there, protected from the wind by the low walls, and slowly seeps deep into the ground. This method transforms the act of farming into something intimate. You do not water a field. You water a square. You tend to each square individually. It creates a sense of closeness between the human and the land. The visual effect is deeply satisfying. The chaos of the dry, cracked earth is replaced by perfect geometry. Rows and columns of squares, order in the midst of disorder. There is a calmness in looking at these lines. They speak of control. They speak of a plan. Further away from the fields, in the dry gullies and wadis where flash floods used to roar, the farmers built a different kind of trap. These gullies were usually dry, dusty scars on the landscape. But if a storm broke in the distant mountains, water would rush through here with destructive force, carrying away the precious topsoil. The farmers walked up these gullies, carrying heavy rocks. They were building check dams. A check dam is not a solid wall that stops the water completely. It is a porous wall, a loose pile of stones laid across the gully. The sound here is echoes off the canyon walls. Crack, thud, scrape. The idea is to slow the water down. When the rushing water hits the stones, it has to pause. It has to find a way through the gaps. In that moment of pause, two things happen. First, the water drops the silt it is carrying, the rich soil behind the dam. Second, the water has time to sink into the ground, recharging the deep aquifers that feed the village wells. These dams are humble structures. They are not the pyramids. They are just piles of rocks. But they are placed with genius. They turn a destructive torrent into a gentle soak. The farmers worked in silence, moving up the gully, building one dam after another, a chain of stone breaks. They were thinking ahead. They were thinking of a rain that might not come for months, but when it did, they would be ready. The landscape was no longer passive. It was an active machine designed to capture moisture. Once the terraces were cut, the bunds were built, and the dams were stacked, the work stopped. The landscape was ready. It looked different now. It was textured. The shadows cast by the low mud walls and the stone terraces created a complex pattern of light and dark as the sun moved across the sky. Now came the waiting. But this was not the anxious waiting of the past. This was a confident waiting. The trap was set. Imagine sitting on the edge of one of these new terraced fields in the late afternoon. The air is still hot, but the sun is lower. The dust hangs in the air. You look at the empty squares. They look like empty cups waiting to be filled. The soil inside each square has been loosened and aerated. It is soft, ready to drink. There is a profound stillness in this scene. The tools have been put away. The geometric lines of the buns stretch out towards the horizon. It looks like a garden of shadows. A light breeze picks up. It blows over the low mud walls. The walls break the wind, creating tiny pockets of calm air inside each square. Even without rain, these walls are working. They are protecting the soil from the drying breath of the desert. The farmers sit and watch. They run their hands over the hard-packed ridges of the buns. They are satisfied. They have done what they can. They have shaped the earth to receive the blessing. And then one evening it happens. It is not a storm. It is a whisper from the sky. The clouds, which have been teasing the valley for so long, finally lower themselves. The air pressure drops. The smell of the air changes. The sharp, metallic scent of ozone mixes with the dusty smell of the ground. The first drop falls. Plip. It hits a stone on the terrace wall. The stone turns from pale gray to dark slate in an instant. Plip, plop. Another drop hits the dust in the center of a square. It creates a tiny crater, a small explosion of dust. Then the rhythm accelerates. Pat, 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 pat. It is a gentle rain, a soaking rain. Watch what happens in the grid. The water does not run. It hits the ground and stays. The low mud walls hold it. Slowly, the bottom of the square turns dark. Then a thin sheen of water appears. A mirror. The waffle garden is working. Instead of a muddy torrent washing away the seeds, we see thousands of tiny, square mirrors reflecting the gray sky. Up in the gullies, the water begins to trickle. It hits the check dams. It slows down, it pools behind the rocks. It sinks, the earth drinks greedily. You can almost hear the soil sighing in relief, hiss as the air bubbles are pushed out by the water. The farmers do not run out to dance. They stand in their doorways, watching. They watch the geometry of their fields fill up. They watch the terraces catch the runoff. They see that their labor has paid off. The rain passes quickly. In an hour, the sky is clear again, but the ground is different. The fields are dark and heavy with moisture. The water is held safely in the earth, locked away where the sun cannot easily steal it. The seeds of the millet and the lentils are now wrapped in a cool, damp blanket. Night falls. The air is cooler than it has been in months. The evaporation from the wet earth cools the breeze. The village sleeps, but it is a different kind of sleep tonight. It is the sleep of security. The earth has been fed. The engineering has worked. The geometric lines of the terraces and the buns fade into the darkness. They are the silent guardians, holding the water, holding the life. Listen to the silence of the wet earth. It is a heavy, satisfied silence. No dust blows tonight. No dry leaves rattle. Just the deep, damp quiet of a world at rest. You are part of this quiet. You are safe in the grid of life. The water is caught. The future is secure. Sleep now. Drift away on the scent of the wet stone and the dark soil. The trap is set. The work is done. Before the drought, the sound of the village was deep. It was a bass note that vibrated through the ground. It was the sound of the great herds. The cattle of the Bronze Age were magnificent beasts. They were the engines of the farm, the symbols of wealth. They were heavy, slow, and water-loving. When a herd of 50 cattle moved to the river, the earth shook. Their breathing was like a bellows, heavy, rhythmic puffs of air. Their lowing was a sound that could be heard for miles, a comforting, resonant anchor in the daily life of the valley. But the cattle were creatures of the wet earth. They needed lush green grass. They needed gallons of water every day. As the river retreated and the grass turned to straw, these giants began to suffer. Their ribs began to show through their hides. Their movements became lethargic. And so the farmers made the hard choice, the choice of survival. The great herds had to go. There was no sudden violence, only a slow disappearance. Day by day, the corrals became emptier. The heavy wooden fences, built to hold back tons of muscle, now stood guarding nothing but dust. Walk past these empty pens now. They are silent. The ground inside is still churned up, frozen in dry mud, preserving the footprints of the giants that once stood there. There is a ghostliness to these spaces. You can almost hear the phantom sound of a cowbell clanking softly in the twilight, but it is just the wind rattling a loose board. The absence of the cattle changed the feeling of the village. It felt lighter, emptier. The heavy anchor was gone. The deep bass note had faded, leaving behind a silence that felt vast and strange. The people missed the warmth of the large animals, their slow, brown eyes, their smell of sweet hay and milk. But the bronze sky has no room for nostalgia. It demands adaptation. Into this silence came a new sound, lighter, quicker, and higher in pitch. Click, 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 the sound of small, hard hooves striking stone. As the cattle vanished, the goats and the sheep arrived. These were not the animals of the lush valley floor. They were the animals of the hills, the scrublands, the edges of the world. They were the survivors. Look at a goat standing on a rocky outcrop. It is a creature designed for the drought. Its coat is coarse and shaggy, protecting it from the sun. Its eyes, with their strange, rectangular pupils, scan the horizon, seeing everything. It does not stand heavy and still like a cow. It is poised, ready to move, ready to climb. The farmers began to trade their remaining grain for these smaller herds. It was a trade of quality for resilience. A cow is a luxury, a goat is a necessity. The sheep, too, changed the landscape. These were not the fluffy white sheep of children's books. These were ancient breeds, lean, with brown or spotted wool and curved horns. They moved in a tight cluster, a single organism flowing over the dry land like a spilled liquid. The smell of the village changed. The sweet, heavy musk of the cattle was replaced by the sharper, drier scent of the goats and the woolly, lanolin smell of the sheep. It was a more primitive smell, the smell of the wilder lands. These animals did not need the lush river grass. They were content with the leftovers. They ate the dry thorns. They ate the tough, bitter shrubs that the cattle would ignore. They could find moisture in the morning dew on a leaf. They were the perfect biological machines for this new, harsh world. With the new animals came a new rhythm of life. Herding cattle was a slow, plodding affair. Herding goats is a dance. Imagine the shepherd now. He is no longer standing in the flat, green fields. He has to go further. He has to become a nomad in his own land. He wakes before dawn. He opens the gate of the smaller, makeshift pen. The animals pour out like water. Bleat, bleat, the sound is chaotic for a moment, then settles into a rhythm. The shepherd walks behind them. He carries a staff not to lean on, but to guide. The goats are curious. They wander. They investigate every crack in the rock, every withered bush. The shepherd must be alert, yet relaxed. Listen to the sound of the herd moving. It is a texture. Hundreds of little feet disturbing the gravel. Scuff, click, scuff, click. It sounds like rain falling on a tin roof, a constant, static white noise. It is a very soothing sound. It washes over the ears, blocking out the silence of the desert. The herd moves like a shadow across the land. They do not stay in one place. They graze and move, graze and move. They are lighter on the land. Their small feet do not crush the soil like the heavy hooves of the bulls. They aerate the ground, breaking up the hard crust, preparing it for the next rain, whenever that might be. The shepherd watches this flow. He learns to think like a goat. He looks for the patches of green hidden in the shade of a boulder. He leads them there. It is a partnership. The man provides protection. The animals provide milk, wool, and meat. The herds push the men further away from the village. To feed the goats, the shepherds had to walk miles into the hinterland, the dry zone between the river and the true desert. This created a culture of solitude. Imagine being that shepherd. You are miles away from the nearest house. The village is just a speck in the distance. Around you there is only the sky, the bronze horizon, and the animals. It is a profound isolation, but it is not lonely. The shepherd talks to his flock. He knows them individually. Move on, broken horn. Stay close, spotted one. His voice is low. He does not shout. In the acoustics of the open plain, a whisper carries far. The animals know his voice. They flick their ears in response. This solitude allows for deep thought. The shepherd has hours, days, simply to watch the world. He watches the way the heat waves distort the mountains. He watches the beetles crawling in the sand. He watches the slow movement of the sun. Time feels different here. It stretches out. There is no urgency. The goats will eat when they find food. They will rest when it is hot. The shepherd mimics them. When the sun is high, the herd finds the shade of a lone acacia tree. They crowd together, lying down in the dust. The shepherd sits with them, his back against the tree trunk. He closes his eyes. He hears the chewing of the cud. Crunch, chew, crunch, chew. It is a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. The breathing of the animals is shallow and quick in the heat. The smell of dust and wool surrounds him. He drifts into a half-sleep, suspended in the heat of the afternoon. This is the shadow of the herd. It is a protective shadow. In a world that is dying, this circle of life, man and beast, remains unbroken. As the sun begins to lower, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, the return journey begins. The herd knows the way. They turn back towards the river. The walk home is faster. The promise of water and safety pulls them. Back in the village, the women wait. The return of the herds is the signal for the evening work. The goats are corralled. Now comes the milking. It is a delicate task. A goat is small. You must crouch low. The milk does not flow in a torrent like it did from the cows. It comes in small, precious streams. ping, ping, ping into the wooden bowl. The milk is different too. It is thicker, richer, whiter. It smells stronger. It is the concentrated essence of the scrubland. It is survival food. A small cup of goat milk has the fat and the protein to keep a child alive for another day. The cheese made from this milk is hard and salty. It can be stored for months. It becomes the new staple of the diet, replacing the beef and the butter of the past. The sound of the milking sheds is quiet. Just the soft murmurs of the women soothing the animals and the rhythmic sound of the milk hitting the vessels. It is a scene of intimacy. The huge scale of the cattle ranching is gone, replaced by this small household scale of husbandry. The day ends. The animals are fed the last scraps of straw. They settle down in their pens. If you look at the village from a distance at twilight, you see a low haze of dust hanging over the roofs. It is the dust kicked up by the thousands of small hooves. It catches the last light of the sun, creating a golden halo around the settlement. The shadows of the herds are long now. The real shadows stretch across the ground, merging with the darkness of the coming night. The bleating stops. The goats curl up, tucking their noses into their flanks. The sheep huddled together for warmth. The deep silence returns, but it is textured now by the presence of these small lives. You might hear a sneeze from a goat or the shifting of weight on straw. The village sleeps with a new guardian, not the mighty bull, but the humble, resilient goat. The farmers have learned that to survive, they must be like these animals, adaptable, tough, and able to find sustenance in the barren places. The heavy footsteps of the past are gone. The light, clicking footsteps of the future have taken their place. Listen to the quiet. The herds are sleeping. The land is sleeping. You are safe among the shadows. Drift away now. Let the rhythm of the chewing, the soft breathing, and the memory of the golden dust carry you into the dark. There comes a moment when the roots, no matter how deep, must be pulled up. The village had been the center of the universe for generations. The walls held the memories of ancestors. The floors held the footprints of children. But when the earth sleeps for too long, the people must wake up and move. This was not an evacuation. There were no running figures, no shouts of alarm. It was a slow migration, a decision made in the quiet of the evening, discussed in low tones by the elders under the starlight. The river is too low here, they would say. We must follow the water. The process of leaving was gentle. It was an unmooring. Like a boat untying its rope from the dock to drift with the current, the families began to detach themselves from their stone foundations. Imagine the house you have lived in all your life. Now imagine taking it apart. The furniture is heavy. The wooden beds, the weaving looms, the grinding stones. They had to decide what to take and what to leave behind to the silence. They chose carefully. They took the tools, the bronze sickles, the flint knives. They took the seeds, the precious sacks of millet and lentils we spoke of. They took the clay pots wrapped in layers of straw to prevent them from breaking. The packing was a slow, deliberate puzzle. Everything had to be balanced. The wooden carts pulled by the few remaining oxen or the sturdy donkeys were loaded with precision. The heavy items on the bottom, the lighter bundles on top. Ropes made of twisted palm fiber were pulled tight. Creaks snap. The knots were tied with the experience of sailors, though they were farmers. They were securing their lives against the bumps of the road. When the carts were full, they looked like moving houses. Piles of mats, baskets, and cloth swayed gently. The house was no longer a place. It was a pile of belongings on wheels. They took one last look at their mud brick homes. They did not board them up. They left the doors open. If a traveler came, let him find shelter. If the wind came, let it blow through. They left the walls to the desert and turned their faces towards the horizon. The journey began not with a trumpet blast, but with a simple command to the oxen. A click of the tongue, a tap of the stick. The wheels began to turn. Creak, thud, creak, thud. This sound, the friction of wood against wood, the axle turning in its hub, became the soundtrack of the migration. It was a constant, high-pitched drone that eventually faded into the background of the mind. It was the heartbeat of the caravan. The pace was incredibly slow. An ox does not rush. It walks at a speed of perhaps 2 miles an hour. It is a meditative pace. If you are walking beside the cart, you do not need to hurry. You can take a step, pause, look around, and take another step. The line of families stretched out across the valley floor. From a distance, they looked like a line of ants, a dark thread woven through the beige tapestry of the land. There was no road. There were only ancient tracks, faint depressions in the hard earth left by traders centuries ago. The dust rose up around the wheels, creating a low fog that moved with them. Inside this dust cloud, the world was soft. The harsh sun was filtered. The figures of the people walking ahead were silhouettes, appearing and disappearing in the golden haze. The walking had a rhythm. Step crunch, sandals on gravel, bare feet on sand. The sway of the body matched the sway of the cart. It was a hypnotic, trance-like state. You stopped thinking about the destination. You simply existed in the movement. The children sat on top of the piled goods in the carts, their legs dangling over the sides, swinging back and forth. They watched the landscape roll by slowly, so slowly. A rock that was in front of them would take 10 minutes to pass and another 10 minutes to disappear behind. This was the speed of the Bronze Age migration. It allowed you to see the world in detail. You saw every lizard skittering under a bush. You saw the way the wind carved patterns into the sand dunes. You saw the color of the sky change imperceptibly from blue to white to gold. In a way, the village had not been destroyed. It had become liquid. It was flowing. The social structure remained. The families walked together. The neighbors who lived next door to you in the stone houses now walked next to you on the track. Conversations continued, but they were disjointed, punctuated by the steps. The heat is strong today. Yes, but the wind helps. They shared water skins as they walked. A warm leather bag passed from hand to hand. The water tasted of the leather, warm and flat, but it was life. The animals were part of this floating village. The goats we spoke of earlier trotted alongside the carts. They were the scouts, running ahead, coming back, circling the slow-moving oxen. The dogs walked in the shade of the wagons, their tongues lolling out, panting in rhythm with the wheels. There was a sense of shared purpose. Everyone was moving towards the same hope, a rumor of better grazing lands to the south, or a bend in the river where the water was still deep. Sometimes, the caravan would stop. A wheel was stuck in soft sand. There was no anger. 3 or 4 men would gather. They would put their shoulders to the wood. Heave, the cart would groan, tilt, and then roll free. The dust would settle. The journey would resume. These interruptions were not annoyances. They were just part of the day. Time was not money. Time was just the distance between sunrise and sunset. As days turned into weeks, the landscape began to change. They were leaving the familiar valley and entering the in-between lands. Here, the earth was different. It was redder, richer in iron. The rocks were jagged, jutting out of the ground like the bones of the earth. The horizon seemed infinite. In the village, the view was blocked by walls and trees. Here you could see for 30 miles in every direction. The sky felt bigger. It pressed down on them, a vast dome of blue. It creates a feeling of insignificance that is strangely comforting. You realize you are just a small speck in a massive world. Your worries seem smaller too. The vegetation changed. They passed through forests of dead trees, standing like gray statues. They passed through patches of stubborn scrub brush that smelled of sage and resin when the cart wheels crushed them. The scent was sharp and cleansing. They saw things they had never seen before. Strange rock formations sculpted by the wind into mushroom shapes. Dry salt lakes that glittered white in the sun, crunching like snow under the wheels. The migration was a tour of the desolate beauty of the Bronze Age world. It was a silent movie of geology. The light played tricks on them. In the distance, they would see a shimmering lake, blue, cool, inviting. But as they approached, it would vanish. A mirage. They did not chase it. They knew the tricks of the heat. They kept their eyes on the ground, on the track, on the slow, steady rump of the ox in front of them. The most magical time of the migration was the evening. As the sun touched the horizon, the signal was given to halt. The floating village would stop and solidify for the night. The carts were drawn into a circle, a defensive ring, a laager. The oxen were unhitched and led to the center to rest. The transformation was instant. The campsite became a home. Rugs were rolled out on the sand. Fires were lit. The smell of wood smoke replaced the smell of dust. It is the most primal, comforting smell in human history. It signals safety. It signals food. The women would grind the millet they had brought. The rhythmic grind sound returned. The flatbreads were baked on the coals. A pot of lentils bubbled, seasoned with dried herbs from the journey. People sat in small groups, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange light of the fires. The rest of the world was pitch black. There were no city lights, no glow on the horizon, just the absolute darkness of the wilderness. Inside the circle of light, there was laughter. There was storytelling. The elders would tell tales of the great migrations of the past, reminding the young that their people had always been travelers. "We are not lost," they would say. "We are just finding a new way." The tension of the day, the heat, the walking, the thirst evaporated with the smoke. The the muscles relaxed. The body, tired from the rhythmic walking, felt heavy and loose. The fires die down to glowing red embers. The conversation fades into whispers, then silence. The people sleep differently when they are on the road. They do not sleep in rooms. They sleep under the open sky or under the shelter of the carts. They wrap themselves in their wool cloaks. The ground is hard, but the body is tired enough to find it soft. Lying there, looking up, the stars are brighter than they ever were in the village. There are no walls to block the view. The Milky Way is a river of light flowing directly overhead, guiding them even in their sleep. The sounds of the night camp are soothing. The chewing of the oxen, the rustle of a sleeping bag. The wind whistling softly through the spokes of a wheel. There is a feeling of freedom. No fields to plow tomorrow. No walls to repair. Just the road, just the movement. They are suspended between the past they left behind and the future they haven't found yet. For this moment, they are nowhere. And being nowhere is a peaceful place to be. The earth turns slowly. The caravan sleeps. The slow migration pauses, gathering strength for another day of drifting across the bronze world. Sleep now. Join the caravan. Let the slow, creaking rhythm of the wheels lull you into a deep, dreamless rest. You are moving. You are safe. You are free. Hunger is a strange architect. It hollows out the stomach, yes, but it also sharpens the senses. In the times of plenty, food was merely fuel. It was consumed quickly, amidst loud conversations, often taken for granted. But on the road, under the bronze sky, food became sacred. The feast of the famine was not a banquet of excess. It was a banquet of attention. When the caravan stopped for the night and the fires were lit, the air changed. The dust of the day settled, and the aroma of the evening meal began to rise. It was a simple smell, smoke, water, and grain, but to the travelers it smelled like life itself. The cooking pot was the altar of the camp. It was a round, black vessel, stained by the soot of 100 fires. Into this pot went the ingredients of survival. Water, precious and carefully measured from the skins, formed the base. Then the millet, we spoke of these hard, yellow pearls before. In the pot, under the heat, they softened, they swelled. They released a creamy, starchy essence into the water, turning it into a thick, golden porridge. But the porridge needed flavor, and this is where the magic happened. The travelers had become foragers. As they walked the slow miles during the day, their eyes were constantly scanning the scrubland. They were looking for the gifts of the desert. A wild onion, small and pungent, dug up from the dry earth. A handful of bitter herbs, sage, thyme, or desert marjoram, growing in the shadow of a rock. A few dried berries, shriveled by the sun but packed with concentrated sugar. These treasures were dropped into the pot. Plop, plop, as the water boiled, it broke down the cell walls of these dry ingredients. It unlocked their secrets. The smell of the sage mixed with the nutty scent of the millet. The steam rising from the pot was complex, herbal, and earthy. It drifted through the camp, pulling the people closer to the fire. It was an invisible thread connecting the stomachs to the soul. Let us look closely at the protein of the migration. There was no fresh meat. The animals were too valuable to slaughter for a single meal. They were the walking bank accounts. Instead, the people ate jerky, strips of meat, salted and dried in the sun weeks or months ago. Holding a piece of this dried meat, it felt like wood. It was hard, dark, and unyielding. You could not eat it quickly. It required patience. The farmers would take a strip of this meat and place it into the stew. They watched it transform. The hot liquid seeped into the dry fibers. The meat relaxed, it expanded. It turned from a dark maroon to a lighter brown. It gave its salt to the broth, seasoning the entire pot. When it was time to eat, the texture was everything. Imagine sitting there, holding a wooden bowl. The warmth of the bowl radiates into your palms, thawing the chill of the desert night. You lift a spoon, a simple scoop made of bone or wood, to your lips. The first taste is the broth. It is hot, wonderfully, soothingly hot. It flows down the throat, warming the chest, spreading a physical sensation of comfort through the body. Then the millet. It is soft but still has a slight bite. It feels substantial in the mouth. It is not mush, it is grain. It demands to be chewed. And finally, the meat. Even after cooking, it is chewy. But in the famine, chewiness is a virtue. It means the meal lasts longer. The people would chew slowly, extracting every drop of flavor, the smoke, the salt, the savory depth of the animal. This rhythmic chewing, chew, pause, became a meditation. No one rushed. To finish a meal quickly was to waste it. To savor it was to extend the pleasure of existence. Sometimes the scouts would find something special, a tuber, a wild root vegetable, similar to a yam or a turnip, buried deep underground to escape the heat. finding one was a cause for celebration. It was a hidden reservoir of water and sugar. These roots were roasted directly in the hot coals of the fire. Imagine the sound: sizzle, pop, hiss. The skin of the root would char and blacken, becoming ash, but inside, the heat was steaming the flesh. When they were raked out of the fire, they looked like black stones. The campers would break them open. Crack, steam would escape, smelling sweet and musky. The inside was soft, white or orange, and piping hot. They would pass the pieces around. Everyone got a share. The taste was shocking in its sweetness. In a diet of grain and salt, this natural sugar felt like a luxury. It coated the tongue. It brought a smile to the face. They ate the skins too. The bitterness of the char mixed with the sweetness of the flesh created a complex flavor profile. They licked their fingers, cleaning off the soot and the sugar, not wanting to lose a single calorie. These roots connected them to the land. They realized that even in the bronze world, the earth was trying to feed them. It was not an enemy, it was a strict mother, hiding her gifts so that only the observant could find them. Eating in the Bronze Age was rarely a solitary act, it was communal. And during the migration, this communal nature intensified. There were not enough bowls for everyone to have their own full portion. Often, a large central pot was placed in the middle of the family circle. They ate with their hands or used pieces of flatbread as scoops. This method of eating creates a rhythm of sharing. You dip your breads, you eat. You wait for your neighbor to dip. You dip again. It requires eye contact. It requires reading the room. If there is little food, you dip shallower. If there is plenty, you dip deeper. It is a silent negotiation of generosity. The flatbread itself was a marvel. Baked on hot stones, it was crisp on the outside and chewy on the inside. It tasted of the smoke from the fire and the stone it was cooked on. When dipped into the broth, it acted like a sponge, soaking up the juices, becoming heavy and soft. The sound of the meal was quiet, not the silence of tension, but the silence of satisfaction. The clinking of a spoon against a clay rim, the soft tearing of bread, the slurping of hot soup. These are the sounds of humans surviving. In the flickering light, watching the faces of their family, the food tasted better. There is a psychological seasoning that comes from shared hardship. We are eating this together. We are alive today. That thought added a richness to the thin soup that no spice could ever replicate. As the meal concluded, a heaviness would settle over the camp. This is the postprandial somnolence, the food coma, but in the famine it is deeper. The body, having received its fuel, immediately signals for rest. It wants to use every ounce of energy to digest, to repair, to store. The conversation slows down, the stories trail off. The fire burns low, turning from orange flames to pulsing red coals. The warmth of the soup is now inside the belly, radiating outward to the limbs. The fingers and toes, cold from the desert night, feel warm and tingling. The eyelids feel heavy, as if weighted down by the comfort of the meal. People begin to lie down right where they sat. They pull their cloaks over them. There is no need to move far. The hearth is the center of sleep. The taste of the wild sage lingers in the mouth. The smell of the wood smoke is trapped in the hair. The stomach is not stuffed, but it is content. It is silent. This is the best kind of sleep, the sleep of the satisfied survivor. You have walked, you have worked, you have eaten. The cycle is complete for the day. The feast of the famine is over. It was small, but it was enough. Let yourself feel that warmth in your own belly. Imagine the taste of the warm broth, the chewy bread, the sweet root. Feel the heaviness in your limbs. The fire is dying down. The dark is wrapping around you like a warm blanket. You are full, you are warm, you are ready to sleep. Every journey must end. The wheels of the ox carts, which had creaked and groaned for so many miles, finally came to a halt. The dust that had followed them like a shadow settled back onto the ground. The silence that followed was different from the silence of the desert. It was the silence of arrival. The place they found was not like the river valley they had left behind. It was not a paradise of lush green carpets and overflowing water. It was a rugged land, a land of hills, of limestone rocks, and of hardy, twisted trees. It was a land that looked tough. But to the eyes of the survivors, it looked like a teacher. They stood there, looking at the new horizon. In the old days, they would have looked at this land and said, "This is too hard. We cannot conquer this," but the drought had changed them. They were no longer conquerors. They were no longer trying to bend the world to their will. They had learned the hardest lesson of the Bronze Age. You cannot fight the sky. You cannot command the rain. So as they unloaded their wagons, placing their few possessions on the rocky ground, they made a silent promise, a new agreement, a covenant. The old covenant was, we will work hard and the earth must yield. The new covenant was, we will listen and we will accept what the earth chooses to give. It was a shift from demand to gratitude. It was a shift from anxiety to peace. They touched the soil of this new home. It was not the deep black mud of the river. It was reddish, dry, and crumbly. It was mixed with stones. But when they held it in their hands, they felt a faint coolness. There was life here, hidden deep down. They respected it. They did not rush to tear it open with plows. They sat with it. They introduced themselves to the land, not as masters, but as guests who intended to stay. In this new land, they found a new ally, the olive tree. If the wheat was the king of the wet valley, the olive was the sage of the dry hills. Look at an olive tree. It does not grow tall and straight, it is twisted. Its trunk is gnarled, looking like ropes of muscle flexed against the wind. Its leaves are small, silver green, and tough. The farmers studied this tree. They saw how it survived. It did not panic in the summer heat. It did not wither when the rain failed. It simply waited. Its roots went down through the cracks in the limestone, finding pockets of moisture that had been trapped there for centuries. The people realized that this tree was the living embodiment of their new philosophy. It was slow. It was patient. It was resilient. They began to plant groves of these trees. Digging the holes was hard work in the rocky soil, but they did it with a sense of ritual. They placed the young saplings into the ground. Pat, pat, pat. They packed the earth around the roots. Teach us, they seemed to say to the trees. Teach us how to live without thirst. The olive tree does not give a quick harvest. You plant it for your grandchildren. This act of planting was an act of faith in the future. It meant they were done running. They were anchoring themselves to this rocky soil. The wind would blow through the silver leaves, creating a soft, shimmering sound. S-H-H-H-H-H, deeper and more textured than the rustle of wheat. It was the sound of longevity. An olive tree can live for 1,000 years. By planting them, the farmers were stepping into deep time. They were moving away from the frantic cycle of the seasons into the slow, steady rhythm of the centuries. Their homes changed too. In the river valley, they built high walls to stand out, to say, we are here. In the new land, they built to blend in. They used the stone that lay scattered on the hillsides. They stacked the rocks without mortar, fitting them together like a puzzle. The houses were low, hugging the contours of the hills. From a distance, you could hardly see the village. It looked like a natural rock formation. This was the architecture of camouflage. It was humble. They dug down into the earth. The floors of the houses were sunk 2 or 3 feet below ground level. Why? Because the earth is a constant temperature. In the scorching summer, the sunken floor remained cool. In the freezing winter, it remained warm. By sinking their homes, they were literally entering the embrace of the earth. They were letting the land hold them. Inside these stone and earth houses, the feeling was like being in a cave, but a warm, safe cave. The light entered through small windows, thick with dust motes. The stone walls absorbed the heat of the day and released it slowly at night. Living here felt grounded. There was a heaviness to the stone that made the people feel secure. The wind could howl outside, the dust could blow, but the stone walls did not shake. They were part of the hill now. The aesthetic was one of shadows and earth tones, grays, browns, rusty reds. There were no bright colors to fade in the sun. Everything was the color of the land. It was restful to the eyes. There was no visual noise. Just the texture of stone and the play of light. The farming continued, but it was dry farming, a method that requires immense patience and observation. They no longer flooded the fields. They didn't have the water. Instead, they farmed the moisture of the air. They noticed that in the early morning, before the sun rose, a heavy dew settled on the rocks. The air held water, even when the clouds held none. They arranged stones around the base of their plants. These stones would cool down at night, condensing the moisture from the air. In the morning, the stones would sweat, dripping precious water directly onto the roots. It was a miraculous, microscopic irrigation system, nature doing the work. They planted vines, grapes that crawled along the ground, their broad leaves shading the soil, keeping it cool. The grapes were small and sweet, concentrated by the sun. They learned to read the soil. If a patch of ground looked too dry, they let it rest. They did not force it. They practiced fallow, leaving a field empty for a year to recover its strength. This was part of the covenant. You take, but you also give rest. You do not exhaust the friend who feeds you. The harvest was smaller, yes. There were no mountains of grain, but the food was denser, richer. The oil from the olives, the wine from the grapes, the dried figs. These were foods that stored well, foods that tasted of the sun and the stone. The anxiety of will the river rise was gone. The river was far away. Here the question was simply, are we listening? And the answer, found in the steady growth of the olive trees, was yes. With this new covenant came a change in the soul of the people. The frantic energy of the old civilization faded away. In the big cities of the river valley, people always wanted more. More grain, more gold, larger temples. Here in the Rocky Hills, enough was the goal. If the jars were half full, it was enough. If the roof kept the dew off, it was enough. This realization brought a profound quietude. The competition ceased. Why compete when you are all relying on the same dew, the same stone, the same patience? The evenings in the new village were incredibly peaceful. The people would sit outside their low stone houses, watching the purple shadows lengthen across the hills. They would watch the goats grazing on the thorns. They would watch the olive leaves turning silver in the twilight. There was a sense of equilibrium, a balance. The tension between man and nature had dissolved. They were no longer fighting a war. They were dancing a very slow dance. They breathed in the air. It smelled of wild thyme, of cooling stone, of dry dust. It was a clean smell. They felt light. The burden of expectation had been lifted. They accepted their smallness in the vast landscape, and in that smallness they found freedom. As night falls over the new settlement, the covenant is sealed not with ink, but with sleep. The village becomes dark. The stone houses merge into the blackness of the hills. Only the stars remain, watching over this partnership. The earth holds the heat of the day and shares it with the sleeping people. The people breathe out carbon dioxide, which the trees will breathe in tomorrow. It is a perfect circle. The struggle is over. The outsmarting of the drought was not about being cleverer than nature. It was about becoming wiser than their past selves. They outsmarted their own greed. They outsmarted their own fear. Now they rest. They rest in the certainty that the earth will provide, as long as they ask gently. The olive trees stand guard in the dark, their roots drinking the secret water deep below. The stones gather the dew. The cycle continues. You are part of this cycle. You are part of this peace. You do not need to fight. You do not need to worry. You only need to rest and let the earth hold you. The covenant is signed. The world is quiet. Sleep now in the arms of the new earth. Time is a falling dust. Minute by minute, year by year, century by century, it falls. It covers the mistakes of the past. It covers the triumphs. It creates a soft, beige blanket over the world, smoothing out the rough edges of history until everything looks like a gentle hill. Let us travel forward now. 3,000, perhaps 4,000 years have passed since the caravan of farmers walked away from their drying river valley. Go back to that valley now. The river is gone completely, or perhaps it has shifted its course miles to the east. The fields of wheat and barley are gone. The mud brick houses, the silent granaries, the waffle gardens, where are they? They are sleeping. Look at the landscape. It is a sea of sand. The wind, that same drying wind we spoke of, has never stopped blowing. Over the millennia, it carried millions of tons of sand and deposited it over the abandoned village. First, it covered the streets. Then, it filled the empty rooms through the open doors. Then, it covered the collapsed roofs. Finally, it buried the highest walls. Now, there is only a mound. Archaeologists call this a tell. It looks like a natural hill, rising strangely from the flat desert floor. But it is not natural. It is a lasagna of civilization. Inside that hill, preserved in the dark, dry earth, is the story we have just told. The silence here is absolute. The modern world is far away. There are no highways, no flight paths. Just the wind sculpting the dunes, constantly rearranging the cover of the book without ever opening it. Standing on top of this mound, you are standing on top of the ghosts of the Bronze Age. Under your feet, 10 meters down, is the floor where the scribe sat. Under that, the floor where his grandfather sat. It is a vertical cemetery of memories. Now, imagine the excavation. It is not a treasure hunt. It is a surgery. A team of archaeologists works on the side of the mound. They move with the same patience as the ancient farmers. They cannot rush. To rush is to destroy. Watch the movement of the trowel. Scrape, scrape. It removes a layer of earth no thicker than a fingernail. The sound is rhythmic, metal on dry dirt. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. They are peeling back the blanket. The sun beats down on them, the same fierce sun that baked the bricks 4,000 years ago. Under the shade of a canvas tent, a worker brushes away the sand from a hard object. Use a soft paintbrush. Swish, swish, the dust flies up like smoke. Slowly, a shape emerges. It is a wall. A mud brick wall. The bricks are distinct, separated by lines of mortar. you can still see the fingerprints of the mason who placed them there. Those fingerprints have been waiting in the dark for millennia to feel the sun again. The colors are muted. Everything is shades of brown, tan, and gray. But to the archaeologist, these are the colors of gold. They dig deeper. They find a floor. It is packed earth, hard and smooth. This is a living surface. The last time light touched this floor was the day the last family walked out, closing the door on an era. There is a profound intimacy in this moment. The air that was trapped in the room is released. The shadows that were locked inside are exposed. We are intruders, but respectful ones. We are visiting the sleeping quarters of history. What do they find? Not chests of gold. The farmers took their valuables with them. They find the things that were too heavy, or too broken, or too forgotten to take. They find the trash of time, and it is beautiful. Here in the corner of a room is a clay pot. It is cracked. Half of it is missing, but look at the rim. It is blackened by fire. This was a cooking pot. This was the pot that held the millet stew, the wild onions, the feast of the famine. Hold a piece of this pottery in your hand. It is rough. It feels warm. You can feel the ridges where the potter's wheel spun. It connects you directly to the hands that made it. It is a physical handshake across the abyss of time. They find a grinding stone. A heavy slab of basalt, volcanic rock, brought from far away. It sits exactly where the woman left it. The surface is worn smooth, polished by years of friction. Grind, grind. You can almost hear the phantom sound of the grain being crushed. They find tiny things. A bead made of blue faience, dropped by a child and lost in the dust. A bone needle used to patch a cloak. A flint sickle blade, still sharp enough to cut a finger. These objects are not lifeless. They are dormant. They have been in suspended animation. When the sunlight hits the blue bead, it sparkles just as it did on the neck of a Bronze Age girl. The color has not aged. The archaeologists tag these items. They write numbers on them with black ink. They place them in plastic bags. It is a clinical process, but the feeling behind it is one of wonder. They are cataloging the debris of a life that was fought for, day by day. As they dig, they look for the end of the story. How does a civilization die? In some ruins, there is a layer of ash, a thick black line in the soil that tells of a fire, a war, a destruction. In others, there are skeletons, telling of a plague or a massacre. But here, in this village of the drought, they find something different. They find nothing. They find clean floors. They find doorways that were not smashed but left open. They find a layer of fine, wind-blown sand directly on top of the house floors. This is the layer of abandonment. It tells the scientist exactly what we told in our story. The people did not die here. They were not killed. They packed up. They swept the floor one last time, and they left. The sand blew in. It settled in the corners. Then it covered the floor. Then it filled the room. It is a peaceful evidence. It confirms the slow migration. It confirms the resilience. The lack of bodies is the proof of survival. The empty houses are the monuments to their decision to move. To the archaeologist, this is a clean context. It is a serene excavation. There is no horror here, only the quiet melancholy of an empty house. It is like walking into a home where the owners have just gone on a long vacation and simply never returned. The story goes even deeper, down to the microscopic level. The excavators take bags of soil from the site. They put this soil into water and spin it. They look at it under high-powered microscopes. They are looking for pollen, palynology. Pollen grains are tough. They survive for thousands of years. They are the fingerprints of the plants. Looking through the lens, the scientist sees the history of the climate. In the deep layers, the layers of the vanished summer, they see pollen of oak trees, of lush grasses, of wheat. Then as they move up the layers, the picture changes. The oak pollen disappears, the wheat pollen becomes scarce, and then they see the new shapes, the jagged pollen of the weeds. The pollen of the millet, the pollen of the olive tree, it is all there, written in the dust. The scientific proof of the seeds of resilience. The microscope confirms that yes, the farmers switched crops. Yes, the landscape dried out. Yes, they adapted. It is a boring science to some, staring at dust specks for hours, but for us it is a rhythm. Slide, focus, count. Slide, focus, count. It is the rhythm of truth. The dust tells the truth that the wind whispered 4,000 years ago. The day at the excavation site ends. The sun begins to set, turning the desert sky into that familiar bruised purple and orange. The archaeologists pack up their tools. They cover the open trenches with tarps to protect them from the night wind. The gentle flapping of the plastic sheets, flap, 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 is the only sound. They walk away, back to their camp. The mound, the tell, is left alone again. In the twilight, the ruins seem to wake up slightly. The shadows lengthen, recreating the height of the walls. For a moment, with the light playing tricks, you might imagine the village is whole again. You might imagine the smell of a wood fire or the bleating of a goat, but it is just the wind. The ruins are not sad to be broken. They are resting. They have done their job. They sheltered the ancestors. Now they shelter the scorpions and the lizards. They are returning to the earth. Dust to dust, it is not a curse, it is a cycle. The mud bricks came from the riverbank. They are becoming sand. The wooden beams have rotted into soil. The ruin is a slow-motion waterfall of matter, returning to the ground. It is a peaceful place to be, a place where time has stopped. A place where the struggle is over, and only the memory remains, buried safe and deep beneath the warm, dry sand. Leave the ruins now. Let them sleep under the starlight. They have waited this long. They can wait forever. The story is told. The scroll is rolled up. The clay tablet is dry. We have walked a long path together. We started in the golden light of the vanished summer by the rushing river. We felt the heat of the bronze sky. We heard the whispers of the drying wind. We tasted the millet and the wild roots. We walked the slow miles behind the ox carts. And we built a new home among the stones. Now the work is done. There is a profound beauty in things coming to an end. It is the beauty of completion. Just as the farmer lays down his hoe at the end of the day, we now lay down the burden of the story. The Bronze Age is over. The farmers, the potters, the scribes, the shepherds, they have all finished their tasks. They do not need to worry about the rain anymore. They do not need to watch the horizon for clouds. They do not need to grind the grain or mend the walls. Their watch has ended. Imagine the valley now, thousands of years later. It is night, a deep, velvety desert night. The wind has finally stopped blowing. The dust has settled completely. The air is cool and still. There is no sound, no creaking wheels, no bleating goats, no cracking fire. Only the silence. The vast, heavy silence of the earth. This is the time for rest, not the short rest of a night, but the long rest of the ages. The ancients are sleeping. They are sleeping in the soil they tilled. They are sleeping in the shadows of the ruins. They are sleeping in the memory of the world. Feel the weight of this peace. It is a heavy, comforting weight. Like a thick wool blanket pulled up to your chin on a cold night, the struggle for survival is a frantic energy. It is sharp, it is bright, but the peace of survival is soft. It is dark, it is slow. The farmers outsmarted the drought, yes, but their greatest victory was finding this peace. They accepted the world as it was, and in return the world gave them rest. Think of them now. Lying in the deep earth, they are part of the geology. They are the roots of the olive trees. They are the minerals in the stone. They are the quiet dust that dances in the moonlight. They are not gone, they have simply changed. They have moved from the state of doing to the state of being. And you, listening to this, you are part of this lineage of rest. Your day is done too. Whatever struggles you face today, whatever droughts of the spirit you endured, whatever miles you walked, it is over. The sun has set on your day just as it set on their era. You have permission to stop. You have permission to lay down your tools. You have permission to let the fields lie fallow. Let your body mimic the ancient earth. Let your muscles become as heavy as the stones we stacked. Let your breathing become as slow as the turning of the seasons. Inhale, slowly. Exhale. Completely, you are safe. You are grounded. You are held by the same gravity that holds the ruins in place. Listen closely to the silence. Do you hear it? It is the eternal lullaby. It is the sound of the universe exhaling. The stars above the desert are the same stars that are above you now. They are the silent witnesses. They watched the Bronze Age rise and fall, and they watched you today. They do not judge. They simply shine, a steady, unblinking light in the darkness. Let your mind drift back over the images we have seen. The green river, fading into the mist, the yellow millet. Swaying in the breeze, the gray stones, cooling in the night, the golden dust, settling on the floor. Let these images blur. Let them soften. They are like dreams now. Faint, pleasant dreams of a time long ago. There is no urgency here. Time does not matter in the long sleep. A minute, a year, a millennium. It is all the same in the dark. It is just a drift. A slow, gentle drift across the ocean of time. You are drifting with them. You are floating on a raft of silence. The current is slow. It carries you away from the shore of wakefulness, towards the deep, dark center of the ocean of sleep. The eyelids are heavy, so heavy. They feel like the stone doors of the granary, sliding shut for the night. Slide, thud, closed. The darkness behind your eyes is warm. It is the darkness of the sunken house. It is the darkness of the seed in the soil. It is a safe place, a place of potential, a place of recharge. Your limbs are sinking into the mattress, deeper, deeper. Just as the ruins sank into the sand, you are being covered by the soft blanket of sleep. Nothing can touch you now. The wind is outside, the heat is gone, the worry is thousands of years away. There is only this moment, this quiet, dark, perfect moment. The ancients are sleeping, the herds are sleeping, the river is sleeping, the wind is sleeping, and now you are sleeping. Let go of the last thread of thought. Let it slip from your fingers like a dry leaf. Let it fall, down, 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 into the long sleep, into the deep peace, into the silence. Good night, traveler. Good night, survivor. Good night.